Okay, let's begin. Just a number of different ideas I'd like to share this evening. The beginning of the parsha, the Behaalosecha is a parsha where there are more individual themes probably than any other parsha. It really covers so many different topics. The beginning of the parsha deals with the menorah, the instruction to Aaron HaKohen to light the menorah. And one of the things that is quite noticeable about it is there's an entire pasuk devoted to the fact that he carried it out. Pasuk Gimel, Parshas Pasuk Gimel, V'yaskein Aaron, and Aaron did so. El mul panei menorah he'ela neresel. He caused its lights to go up towards the middle of the menorah. Kasher tzivah Hashem es Moshe, as Moshe commanded, as Hashem commanded Moshe. And Rashi says, "Lahagid shivchai shel Aaron shloshina." This tells you the praise of Aaron that he didn't change, didn't do anything different. The question is obvious. Rabbi Simcha Zissel of Kelm asked the question in Sefer Chochmah Musa. Why is it that we need an entire posuk in the Torah to tell us that Aaron did as he was commanded? Why on earth would you think that he wouldn't? And he's been doing lots of things, and he's been doing lots of things that Hashem has commanded him to do. So why here specifically in your whole posuk saying he did as he was commanded? Simcha says a very important principle. He says that of all the things that Aaron HaKohen needed to do, the arrangement of the menorah was probably the easiest task in a way. I mean, it was a very relatively straightforward task. It would be seen as something very small. The idea of putting the neirus in the correct way and making sure that the wicks would point towards the middle stem, right? He was involved with hugely significant and complex things going inside the Kodesh HaKadoshim, offering the Toras. So you could think that the idea of arranging the menorah could be something which was perhaps less significant. And therefore the Torah devotes a whole pasuk to say that even something which looks relatively small and straightforward, like arranging the wicks, for Aaron was a major deal, and it was equal to the most intense avodah, the one which was involved with going right inside on Yom Kippur, right?
Could our theory be linked to the deaths of his two sons as well, where they did something that they weren't told?
Interesting, yes, very interesting. I mean, there's a greater emphasis on Aaron doing the right thing because they did something they weren't. Yeah, that's very interesting, fascinating. Yeah, I didn't think of it that way. And therefore, that could also be why the Torah emphasizes it so strong. Yeah, that's a complementary idea to this, absolutely, yeah. Let's emphasize with Aaron. And he says the idea is that he was particularly attuned to this. And the message, he says, is that we can often have things which to us seem insignificant, but they are actually very significant. And this is what the Torah is trying to emphasize here. That one of the great qualities of Aaron HaKohen, one of the qualities that Hashem seeks of us, is an attitude that does not measure mitzvahs or ways and things we are supposed to do based on how we perceive them to be significant or how we perceive them to be complex or less complex or straightforward or not. It's kasher tzivah Hashem es Moshe. The idea is that we need to act as we are commanded, we are commanded to act. So let's continue with another idea. There's a beautiful Rashi on Perek Ches, just a bit later on Pasuk Yud Tes. The Rashi brings there is a pasuk where it mentions the Bnei Yisrael 5 times in one pasuk. It talks about the Bechorim and how they were. Hashem says, "I smote all the Bechorim and the firstborn in Egypt, and I've taken the Leviim in place of the firstborn." They're given to Aaron and his sons from the Bnei Yisrael to serve the service of the Bnei Yisrael in the Oil Moed. That's 3. Now, there won't be a plague amongst the Bnei Yisrael when the Bnei Yisrael come to the Kodesh. 5 times says the words Bnei Yisrael in that pasuk. And Rashi brings here that that it says 5 times to tell us how cherished the Bnei Yisrael are. Communion chamisha chumshei Torah. Mentioned the Medrash in Abrasius Rabbah that says that they're mentioned 5 times, like the 5 books of the Torah. And there is a sefer by someone called Yitzchok Maltzen, who's Sefer Siach Yitzchok, and he says in a Pirush to Musaf on Rosh Hashanah, which beautifully links. I have to remember it for Rosh Hashanah, that's the challenge, but beautifully links an explanation of a posuk, a very famous posuk that we bring in the Musaf of Rosh Hashanah to this posuk. Posuk is in Yirmiyahu Lamed Aleph Pasuk Yates. Havein Yakili Ephraim Im Yeled Shashuim. The Ephraim is a precious to me, a precious child to me, a child of delight. Kimidei Dabri Boy. When I speak of him, Zochores Korenu Oid. I mention him furthermore. And he says, what is the meaning of that posuk? Obviously, if you talk about someone, right, then you're remembering that. We bring it in Musaf because one of the pasukim of Zechronos, right? But obviously you remember, when you speak about someone, you're remembering that by definition, yeah? So he says no, because when people talk about the way people work is, that generally speaking, when you begin to speak to someone about something, first you mention them by name, and then you don't mention their name. You just say, I said to you, I said to him, so and so, he said to me this, and you don't mention the name each time. Just say, I said to him this, he said to me that, etc., etc. But when you speak about someone who is very important or significant or beloved to you, then you mention the name every time. You say, I said to the king, and the king replied to me. You don't say he said that. You say the king. Every time you want to mention the king, you want to say his name. Right? You want to say the king. Or for example, a parent and child. So I would say, I said to my son said to me, because there's a closeness, right? And that's how it is. And that's because that brings itself a significance, a closeness and enjoyment. And he says that is what Yirmiyahu Hanavi is emphasizing when he praises the connection between the Bnei Yisrael and Hashem. They are Habein Yakir, this precious son, whenever B'chol Pam Shemedabrim Boy, Kimidei Dabri Boy, every time I speak of him, right? Zocha es Korenu Oid. I remember him by name. I mention him by name. And he says that's what Chazal mean when they emphasize the fact that Bnei Yisrael are mentioned 5 times in this pasuk. It's lahidiach chiboson in the eyes of Hashem, to cherish the eyes of Hashem. Because whenever the Bnei Yisrael are mentioned here, even then it's not necessary, ostensibly, right? They're mentioned by name. Yeah, and even though that's not the normal way of referring to them, and he could have just said, la'avodas avodosam, to mention their souls. Why does it Bnei Yisrael again? Bnei Yisrael, Bnei Yisrael. And the answer is because this is the idea of the fact that there is a closeness, there is a mentioning them by name because it shows how close Hashem is to us. Why is it specifically in this pasuk? Why emphasize it here? It could have been anywhere else in the Torah. So the Sfas Emes says in the name of his grandfather Chidushei Orim that when it says in the pasuk that I took the Levium and I placed the Levium in their stead. And what that could have done is it could have meant the Bnei Yisrael would have what we call Chalishas Hadas. They'd give up. They'd feel weak. It's not for us anymore, right? The Levium are chosen. And that's why specifically here it mentions 5 times. They are emphasized again and again to show that they are cherished to Hashem, the Bnei Yisrael. Okay? And he brings another idea. Or this is the Sefer called Torah, are emphasizing on it goes sort of going, adding on to this idea of the Chidushei Orim. Why 5 times? Why 5? And Rashi says the Chamisha Chumshei Torah, the 5 books of the Torah, because through the Torah, that's how they're able to, if you like, go even beyond and above the avodah, the service that the Levium are doing. Okay, and this is the idea of why it's specifically emphasized and re-emphasized like this in this pasuk. When a bit later on in the parsha, and again, as I said, there's so many different themes we can't emphasize, we can't really deal with all of them. If you go to the parsha of the Chatzotzros, the trumpets, so the trumpets have a very specific purpose, and they also have a very specific procedure, because there are 3 reasons. Rashi explains this in Pasuk Zion. There are 3 reasons why the trumpets can be blown, and there was always a very specific way they would know what it was for. It could be used to gather the people, Mikra Ha'eda. Second reason is the Masa Esamach, is telling them to travel. This is Perek Yud Pasuk Zion. And there's also to gather the Nasim, to gather the princes. And Rashi explains that each one had a different symbol, a different sign, right? To gather everyone, it was with 2 trumpets, but no teruah, just the tekiah. If it was to gather the Nesiim, the leaders of the Shvatim, of the tribes, that was one shofar, not two. Both of them were also just a trua, not with a tkiya. And when they wanted a journey, the Masa Machanos, they used both of them. Okay, there was two kohanim, both trumpets, through a trua and a tkiya, right? So therefore, you could tell what the sign was for. The Ralbag in his Perush on the Torah goes through a number of different explanations as to why these trumpets existed. And one of the ideas he says is as follows. He says that the reason for the trumpets was lahidia, to tell, to teach, shiroi lemanhe, that a leader needs lasader inyonov, to organize his matters, that when either the leaders of the people or the whole people need to come to him, they have to feel equal. They have to feel that either all wanted or no one is wanted. In other words, you can make a decision to only gather the leaders, or you can make a decision, right, to gather all the people. But if whatever you do, you can't single them out. You have to it has to be the whole group, right, with equally. Because if you call some of them before the others, there's going to be jealousy, there's going to be strife, there's going to be machlokas, and they will feel that, and they will feel that. They will feel that straight away, and therefore, this was the idea, he says, of the trumpets. These noises, these sounds, everyone would hear at the same time, and that would mean that they would all be able to come, and no one would feel left out. And if there would be they called sometimes to some, sometimes to the other, there would be a distinction between them, and they would notice it, and it wouldn't work, right? And that's why it was that it was specifically done in this way. So in other words, what the Ralbag is saying, that the lesson of the Chatzotos of the trumpets, again, there is obviously the parsha itself is explaining what happened, but one of the messages is a lesson in leadership, that when you come to gather people, you need to use trumpets. You need to do it in such a way that the message goes to everyone equally, so that you don't have a situation where through your leadership style, you end up placing one person above another, or saying one is more significant. You have to do something that applies equally to all. It's just a different take on the idea of the trumpets. We have the parsha of the misonanim, of those who complained, the misonanim, and this is really the beginning of a sequence that takes us all the way through to the end of, well, really, Korach and also part of Chukas as well, but of negative episodes that occurred to the Bnei Yisrael. A lot of discussion to each one and how it works, and why it's all gathered here. In this was really the story of the journey in the Midbar, one after the other. The introduction to it, leaving aside Rashi says about the nuns and how there's a hint to something else they did before, the way they left Har Sinai, right? That's Rashi discusses that. This is the beginning of Perek Yud Aleph, Posuk Aleph, but the Vayhi Ha'om Kumis Oinanim. And the question is, what is the Vayhi Ha'om Kumis Oinanim? So Rashi says, Ein Ha'om El Rishoim. This means the Rishoim, and that's what the people refers to here. And what does it mean? What did they do? So Rashi says, Misonanim really means to complain. Ein misonanim el loshan alila. It means a pretext. Mevakshim alila heach lifresh mecher hamokum. They were looking for a pretext how to leave the service of Hashem, and that's what it says. He brings a pasuk with Shimshon kisayano hu mevakish. It's a pretext. It's an excuse. And what was it that they did? They complained in such a way that it was Ra ba'oznei Hashem. It was evil in the eyes of Hashem, in the ears of Hashem, that they intended to do something which would anger Hashem. And what did they do? They complained. Rashi says, it's been 3 days and we haven't rested already from the troubles and the toils of the journey. It's hard. And it says, Vayichar apai, and his anger wrought against them. And the fire of Hashem burnt, and it basically consumed the Eira of Rav, those who were on the edge of the camp, right? Some say, Rabbi Shimon Assi actually brings as well, he says, the leaders. Either way, what you have here is in just one pasuk. This is the whole episode of the Misonanim, this entire pasuk. The Torah doesn't tell us explicitly what they were complaining about, right? Rashi explains they were complaining about the trouble of the journey. And then after that, we move on to the next parsha, which was where it says Hashem, the people complain, the people cry out, Moshe davens, and the fire dies down, and they call it Tavera because of the Misonanim, right? The burning fire. And then it carries on about the type and the design. They want to go back to Mitzrayim, and they like the food and everything else. So this is really, you have to understand that this is a separate episode, really, right? These complainants. And Rabbeinu Bachai has a slightly different, a different take or an important perspective on this word misonanim. He says that he brings a pasuk in Eicha, and he understands that it really means I think like a type of pain. It means pain or groaning, that type of thing. They were in pain, right? They were mitzta'er, yeah. So as a result of going into the desert, and this was bad in the ears of Hashem. They weren't happy. Misonanim understands basically like their complaining was they were upset, really upset. They weren't smeichim, they were full of worries. They were full of fears. Muchrochim means is that they went into the desert as if they were forced, and they worried and they were fearful, and when they should have been full of simcha. V'omar, and the pasuk says k'misonanim, like misonanim. They were mumbling. They were like they were complaining, but they weren't really explaining it clearly. They weren't really saying what the problem was, because they were afraid of Moshe. You shouldn't hear. Hashem heard the complaint, not Moshe, because they didn't want to make their fears known. So there are two important points Rabbeinu Bachai brings out. Number one, he says that really the misonanim, it's a different to Rashi, right? It's not so much a complaining and looking for a pretext and basically troublemakers, which is how we normally explain it. Rabbeinu Bachai's pshat is that they were worried, they were fearful. What were they fearful about? They were fearful of the worries of the journey and what would be and what would happen and everything else, right? When they should have been joyful, they were on their way to Eretz Yisrael. So they didn't have the right perspective. But the second problem, which compounded those concerns, which you could argue, had some legitimacy to them. She argued they should have trusted in Hashem. But what was the second thing they did? They should have spelled it out. They should have said, look, this is our concerns. Or they didn't want Moshe Rabbeinu to hear. So it ended up being this fearful atmosphere and murmuring and almost like a sort of depressive state when they as they left finally to journey towards Eretz. So it should have been just a few days, and they should have entered Eretz straight away. And the message and the idea behind this pshat of Rabbeinu Bachai is that sometimes a state of mind can lead to very negative consequences. And had they only explained what they were worried about, had they said it to Moshe Rabbeinu, had they explained, look, we have these concerns about where we're going and what's going to be and everything else, maybe things would have been different. But because they didn't, and they were in that state and in that negative mindset, and that led to the negative consequences as a result. It's just again a different perspective, perhaps on an episode that we're quite familiar with. So just to share a few ideas on the end of the parsha, on the end of the parsha, the humility of Moshe Rabbeinu. Voish Moshe Onav Ma'oz. This is Perek Yud Beis Pasuk Gimel, the episode of Miriam and Moshe Rabbeinu. Miriam speaks about Moshe Rabbeinu, and as a result, she gets Toras. And the Torah says, in very, very famously, Pasuk Gimel, so Yud Beis Gimel, it says, "Voish Moshe Onav Ma'od Mikol Ha'adam Asher Panei Adamo." That Moshe Rabbeinu was more humble than anyone else. When Miriam said these words, "Harak ach b'Moshe deber Hashem, halo gam bonu diber." He's spoken to us as well. Is it only Moshe Rabbeinu? Vayishma Hashem and Hashem heard, but Voish Moshe Onav Ma'od Mikol Ha'adam. So Toras Chaim in his Pirush on Torah asks that it says he brings a sifri The Sifri says, the Medrash says, "Mekoil ha'adam hashal pnei ha'adama," from every person on the face of the earth, v'lo min hamalachim, but not from the angels, the malachim. So he says, what does that mean? You can ask a simple question: how is it possible that someone, Moshe Rabbeinu, took them out of Mitzrayim, he led them through the splitting of the sea, he received the Torah min hashamayim? How can a person like that, who has achieved so much more than anyone else, how can he genuinely consider himself koton mikulam, like smaller than anyone else, right? How is it possible? And he says the answer is, he brings the funny, there's a chiyuv ha'avoda al ha'odam ulefi hasagosoi. The obligation we have in our service of Hashem is based on what our hasagos are. Our hasagos means, right, what your ambitions are. Where do you want to be? Where do you see yourself? Moshe Rabbeinu went up to Shemayim, right? He was in a totally different level. He saw in Shemayim things that no one else could imagine, right? So he felt that he was never able to fulfill his obligation, right? Because like the other, he went up to Shemayim, and therefore he saw himself. He didn't compare himself to people in this world. He compared himself to the Malachim. He saw them, and he saw what they were able to do, and how close they came to Hashem. So of course he was more humble than anyone else. He was more humble than anyone else in this world because he didn't consider himself in the context of people in this world. He wasn't looking. That wasn't his barometer. Let's put it like that. His barometer wasn't what is Ruvain doing? What is Shimon doing? His barometer was, what are the Malachim doing? What are the angels? Yeah, that's the point of reference, exactly.
Does he consider himself on such a high level as if he's not being so humble?
No, because it's not that he is considering himself. Yeah, no, but it's not a question of higher level. It's a question of the question was how can it genuinely be that he considers himself more humble than anyone else? And the answer is because when your frame of reference is such that everyone you are comparing yourself to is how greater than you or bigger than you, then you genuinely feel less than anyone else. So it's not that he's looking. It's not. I mean, okay. Let's do the second bit and see if this resolves it. There's a sefer called the Chidushei Halev, which I think is a parish of Rabbi Heinrich Leibowitz from America, and he says that you see that from what the Toras Chaim is saying, that Moshe Rabbeinu fundamentally, what is the key point? How does Moshe Rabbeinu achieve the humility? He expects from himself much more than he expects from others. He's not expecting anyone else to look at the malachim, to look at the angels, but he expects that of himself because he has such ambition, because he in a spiritual sense, he compares himself to the malachim, and therefore he sees himself as not fulfilling what he should do, right? What he should be doing, right? He hasn't fulfilled his obligations. He hasn't completely used up what he's capable of, and therefore everyone else, he's also done the kafskus. He looks at everyone else in a meritorious way because he says, well, they fulfill their obligations, and that I think answers perhaps your question, Joe. You know, he's looking at everyone else has done their duty. They've done what they need to do, but I haven't because I know I know what I should be. I know where I should be. Right? I know where I should be.
He's not better than the angels in a way. He hasn't achieved what angels can achieve.
Exactly. And the point is this is a secret to understanding, really, to getting to understand the concept, really to properly understand the concept of what humility is. You know, we look at people, and I spoke about this last Shabbos. Morosh Yeshiva of Gershon Edelstein, the Chatzai Baruch Hu, was genuinely, and everyone must be many of them spoke about this. He was incredibly humble. Like there was nothing of himself. And you ask them, how is it possible when you know that everyone is seeing you as the address, right? As the address for all the shilas and all the rabbonim. How can you live that way? And I think this is part of it. The key is because if you look at yourself and you compare, you're not comparing yourself to anyone else. You're saying, I know what I'm capable of. I know where I should be, and therefore I feel like I haven't fulfilled what I need to do. And that's why he considers himself more humble than anyone else. Okay. What he was doing was effectively, he says, is he was looking for the things that he was missing and the milas of other people, right? And that's what he was doing. So he brings the Chovos Halavavos from Shos Salanta as well, and the Toras Chaim. They all go in the same vein, that in a similar way, that a humble person, an onof, is someone who recognizes his capabilities, right? His or her capabilities in a spiritual sense or in chokhmah, in understanding the Torah, doesn't deny what they're capable of, right? And such a person naturally should think they're greater than others, right? But what the midah of anova does, what humility does, is it causes the person to focus on the things they are actually missing and what everyone else is doing right? The milas other people have, okay? And that's how he thinks that other people effectively are greater than him. Although he does say there's an interesting distinction between the way the Toras Chaim looks at it and the Toras Chaim. He says the Toras Chaim and the Rabbi Birnbaum say that when a person looks at himself, he should emphasize his negative aspects, the things he's got wrong, things he needs to put right, and looking at others should emphasize the things they do well, right, and not to look at their things they do wrong. Okay. Whereas when it comes to the Toras Chaim, he is saying when a person looks at himself, he should look at his possibilities, his greatness, his capabilities, so that he has a greater sense of his own obligations, right? And when looking at others, he should effectively consider the things he's lacking. So to judge them, like of course, when looking at yourself, that's you have a greater obligation. It's just again an insight into the concept of how it can be that someone so great can genuinely be humble. It depends what you're looking at, what your hasagas are. The final idea, just very briefly, there was a drosha given by Diane Moshe Swift, shortly. This happens to be, so I think it's a collection of his droshas, and he points out it was given in, apparently according to the notes, it was given at Brixton Shul after D-Day. So we don't go through the whole thing. But one of the points he brings out is that what you notice when Moshe Rabbeinu is slandered in this way, effectively is accused of Hagamah, or when Miriam speaks against him, what does Moshe do? The answer is he's silent. He's silent, right? He says a great person doesn't focus on those who are putting him down. He gets on with the task and ignores accusations. He says you do not surrender a cause and turn your back on an ideal because of a few slanderers in your institution. Yeah. So he says, what could be expected when people have just been taken out of bondage, not into a free, happy country, into a desert? Sometimes there was no water, sometimes no food, there's no Molech, all sorts of things. To keep a balance without being swept off one's feet was the greatest achievement. He says that was the strength of Moshe Rabbeinu, to hold on at all costs, to try to do even more, to daven, and to daven hard for those who rose up in opposition. Right? He says, all who believe in the preservation of true Torah ideals must refrain from any temptation to slander one another and expose one another. There must be a sincere endeavor to create a disciplined, orderly, dignified unity. We must not sell our ideals short. We must not barter our dignity for selfish prejudice and sectional interest. Like Moshe, we must not abandon the ship because we are sometimes accused of something we did or did not do. He says, Behaalosecha. We have to kindle a light that will spread to illumine the spiritual darkness of ignorance and prejudice, the glory of Hashem and of Israel. It's a beautiful idea. You know, you're looking at the beginning of the Parsha and the end. You light the net, right? Moshe Rabbeinu here, you naturally expect that he would have had some reaction to what he was accused of, whatever. He doesn't. He doesn't do that. He doesn't feel there's a necessity to do that. It's a temptation to respond. But very often, responding just brings us down. And we have to continue doing the right thing, continue doing what we're supposed to do, what we're meant to do. And that allows us to achieve what we're meant to achieve in life. Just a beautiful idea. We'll finish with that. Have a very good Shabbos.
Thank you. Rabbi Birnbaum, the Rabbeinu Bachai was on the Pasuk or was it somewhere else in the Parsha?
Yes, it's a very, very brief Rabbeinu Bachai on the Pasuk.
Right,
just a few lines. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you very much.
Okay, take care. Have a good Shabbos.